On spoiling tete-a-tetes insist. They'd none of 'em be missed. They'd none of 'em be missed.
He's got 'em on the list. He's got 'em on the list. And they'll none of 'em be missed. They'll none of 'em be missed.
There's the banjo serenader and the others of his race, and the piano organist. I've got him on the list. All people who eat peppermint and puff it in your face. They never would be missed. They never would be missed. And the idiot who praises with enthusiastic tone all centuries but this and every country but his own. And the lady from the provinces who dresses like a guy and who doesn't think she dances but would rather like to try. And that singular anomaly, the girl who's never kissed. Well, I don't think she'd be missed. I'm sure she'd not be missed.
He's got her on the list. He's got her on the list. And we don't think she'll be missed. We're sure she'll not be missed.
And that nice Iprius nuisance who just now is rather rife, the judicial humorist. I've got him on the list. All funny fellows, comic men, and clowns of private life. They'd none of 'em be missed. They'd none of 'em be missed. And apologetic statesmen of a compromising kind, such as whatchamacallhim, Thingamabob, and likewise, well, never mind. And tut-tut-tut, and what's his name? And also, well, you know who. But the task of filling up the blanks I'd rather leave to you. But it really doesn't matter whom you place upon the list, for they'd none of 'em be missed. None of 'em be missed.
You may put 'em on the list. You may put 'em on the list. And they'll none of 'em be missed. They'll none of 'em be missed.
Now, Mr. Green, you had something to say about I've got a little list.
Yes. 1951, we opened, the D'Oyly Carte opened at the Savoy Theatre for what was known as the Festival of Britain season. And we were opening with the Mikado. And eventually, Winston Churchill was invited. And he duly accepted, took his place in the box. Everybody, of course, knew that he was there. At this time, Winston Churchill was not the Prime Minister. The Conservative government were the opposition, the loyal opposition, and he was the leader of the loyal opposition. But the general election was looming up very shortly. In fact, I think there were already, what's the word?
Electioneering.
Electioneering, yes. I couldn't think of electioneering. Yes. And I made my entrance. And I knew that I was going to come up against one big problem. And that is where the second verse carries on with, and apologetic statesmen of a compromising kind. I dare not look at Winston Churchill. I knew the audience would pick it up at once, and they did. There was a roar, such as whatchamacallhim, Thingamabob, and likewise. I still daren't look at Winston Churchill. Well, never mind. And tut-tut-tut, and what's his name? And it was at that moment that I had a brainwave. I looked straight at Winston Churchill and said, well, you know who. And I really didn't think the audience would ever stop laughing. And I'm told that having once looked at him, I looked away again fast, I'm told that if I'd kept my eyes on him, I'd have seen him practically fall out of the box.
Splendid. What a lovely story.
One of my, I think, one of my most delightful moments on the stage at any time whatsoever.
Did you meet him afterwards?
Not then, no.
Not then.
He did not come round because to get to the dressing rooms at the Savoy, you had to climb down onto the ground floor and then climb down some more steps. And after you'd done that, you had to climb up a couple of steps.
Incidentally, why or whence Savoyards? Is it the association with the Savoy Theatre that gave us that name?
Yes, actually. It was Richard D'Oyly Carte, the original impresario of the Gilbert and Sullivan operettas. He built the Savoy Theatre out of the profits they'd made on their previous productions, which I think all took place at the Opera Comique.
Mm-hmm.
Patience, as a matter of fact, was halfway through its run and opened the new Savoy Theatre with the new electric light, which incidentally is a story in itself. And from then on, of course, every one of their future operettas was produced at the Savoy, and anybody who had worked through these series was given the name Savoyard.
It stuck.
And it's stuck ever since.
Was Patience the first of them, actually?
Patience was the first operetta to open the Savoy Theatre.
Can we hear something from Patience?
Yes, now there's one lovely, lovely song in that, which I'm very fond of. Am I alone and unobserved, and followed by If You're Anxious for to Shine. This is Bunthorne's song, the charlatan, explaining that really and truly he is a charlatan. He is a sham. And then explains to everybody that if you really want to get on in this particular lily-gazing cult and impress everybody, if you're anxious for to shine in the high aesthetic line, he tells you just how to do it.
Am I alone and unobserved? I am. Then let me own I'm an aesthetic sham. This air severe is but a mere veneer. This cynic smile is but a wile of guile. This costume chaste is but good taste misplaced. Let me confess, a languid love for lilies does not blight me. Lank limbs and haggard cheeks do not delight me. I do not care for dirty greens by any means. I do not long for all one sees that's Japanese. I am not fond of uttering platitudes in stained glass attitudes. In short, my medievalism's affectation, born of a morbid love of admiration. If you're anxious for to shine in the high aesthetic line as a man of culture rare, you must get up all the germs of the transcendental terms and plant them everywhere. You must lie upon the daisies and discourse in novel phrases of your complicated state of mind. The meaning doesn't matter if it's only idle chatter of a transcendental kind. And everyone will say, as you walk your mystic way, if this young man expresses himself in terms too deep for me, why, what a very singularly deep young man this deep young man must be. Be eloquent in praise of the very dull old days which have long since passed away, and convince them, if you can, that the reign of good Queen Anne was culture's palmiest day. Of course you will pooh-pooh whatever's fresh and new, and declare it's crude and mean, for art stopped short in the cultivated court of the Empress Josephine. And everyone will say, as you walk your mystic way, if that's not good enough for him, which is good enough for me, why, what a very cultivated kind of youth this kind of youth must be. Then a sentimental passion of a vegetable fashion must excite your languid spleen. An attachment a la Plato for a bashful young potato, or a not too French bean. Though the Philistines may jostle, you will rank as an apostle in the high aesthetic band. If you walk down Piccadilly with a poppy or a lily in your medieval hand. And everyone will say, as you walk your flowery way, if he's content with a vegetable love which would certainly not suit me, Why, what a most particularly pure young man this pure young man must be.
I loved your story in your autobiography, Mr. Green, about your monocle. I should explain that Mr. Martyn Green habitually wears a monocle to correct a weakness in his left eye. This is no more uncommon in England than wearing a beard, both very sensible adornments, if I may say so.
I once wore one of those too.
Did you have both?
Mm.
I would have always felt that was overdoing it. Would you tell us the story of your arrival at the Prince of Wales Theatre in London when you met Fred Hobbs and Mr. Poole and the great Henry Lytton for the first time?
Yes, I don't know who was most embarrassed. I think I was, actually. The first person I met was Freddie Hobbs. He was the stage manager. He wore a monocle, one of these gold-rimmed monocles with a gallery on it. As you'll observe, the one I wear is a rimless. And
much more sophisticated.
And much easier, too, to keep in the eye. And I had my monocle in my eye, but he gave me a look to begin with. But he didn't say anything. He said, all right, I'll take you along to see Mr. Poole. He's the company manager, business manager. So I was led into Charlie Poole's office, and he was wearing a monocle, a rimless monocle. He gave me a look, but didn't say anything. And then I was led backstage to meet Henry Lytton. I had met him some years previously, but this occasion was for Henry to meet his understudy and for me to meet Henry and know who it was that I was going to cover. And as I met Henry, he was wearing a monocle. And all three gave me a good stare. I think that they had some idea that I was trying to rib them. So I sort of coughed, you know, and put my handkerchief out. And the next thing was that my monocle was in my handkerchief and in my pocket.
I think they hadn't noticed.
I could only see them then with one eye, but that didn't make any difference. I felt much better. It took me quite a few years to get to the point where I could wear the monocle
without being
conscious of their looks and their stares.
You know, the interesting thing is the only occasion when I'm aware of the fact that I'm bearded or reminded is when I meet another man with a beard. If 2 or 3 of us get together, I feel as I'm at the Last Supper.
Yes, what helped me a little bit there was the fact that Freddie Hobbs eventually, his eyes got so bad that he couldn't wear his monocle. He had to take spectacles, so that only left 3 of us.
Yes. And of course, when you took over from Henry Lytton...
Well, Charlie Poole left the company before that, so there was 2. It sounds like the little old song.
That's right.
What is it? Then there were 2.
Then there were 2.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Green, with so long an experience of playing in the same operettas or operas, can you recall occasions on which things went wrong, not according to the book?
Oh, I can recall many, many. One in particular when a cat crossed the stage during the second act of Ruddy Gore.
Black cat?
No, it was one of these sort of freckled, half marmalade and with a white nose and maybe it got a ginger eye. The other was black. But I, as Robin O'Capple, had just gone on, or in this case, in the second act, he becomes Sir Riven Murgatroyd, and he sees his brother, who was the bad baronet and is now pure, with Mad Margaret, and he stops and says, Sir Despard and his wife. And just at that moment, the cat crossed the stage to me, rubbed itself up against my legs, and I was so dumbfounded at this, I didn't say a word. I just watched it as it walked across the stage and went off in the other wing. And with that, I turned to the audience and spoke my next line.
Which was?
This visit is unexpected.
Was that really the next line?
Yes.
Sweet.
And again in Ruddy Gore, our musical director, Reggie Burston, at that time, he was the owner of a beautiful chow dog, which he always left in the musician's room with the door closed. But one occasion he left the door open, and he went into the pit for the second act of Ruddy Gore. The ghosts had just come out onto the stage, from their frames, the pictures, and the dog walked onto the stage, went straight down to the footlights, and wagged its tail at Reggie Burston, who couldn't get onto the stage from that point, and one of the ghosts went forward to try and take the dog off. And the result was the dog snapped and caught him in the hand, and this very, very lively ghost let out one yell and ran off the stage to get his hand bandaged.
Sweet.
The result was, of course, that Reggie eventually got up onto the stage, took the dog away himself, while the leader, the first violinist, took over the stick, and we carried on one ghost short.
Did you ever hear of the incident of Sir Thomas Beecham during rehearsal of Prince Igor?
I don't think I've heard a lot of stories of Sir Thomas Beecham, not this one.
Many of them are apocryphal, but I believe this is true, of when Prince Igor has to mount the horse in the middle of the stage and gallop off the stage or go off at a brisk trot. The horse is standing there waiting, and on this particular morning, Sir Thomas had taken the company through several times, and the patience was running thin on all sides. And just as Prince Igor was about to leap on its horse, the horse stood back and performed on the stage a natural function. The whole company broke down with hoots of laughter. Beecham was not amused, and
No.
he tapped on the music stand, and when he got silence, he said, "Critic as well as performer."
Yes, I can believe that of Tommy Beecham. Very much so.
What shall we hear now? Choose another item from your vast
I
repertoire.
mentioned Ruddigore a little while ago. There's a very delightful trio in that.
Which one?
It's the trio between Robin Oakapple, Sir Despard, and Mad Margaret in the second act. My eyes are fully open to my awful situation. I shall go at once to Roderick and make him an oration.
Let's have it.
My eyes are fully open to my awful situation. I shall go at once to Roderick and make him an oration. I shall tell him I've recovered my forgotten moral senses, and I don't get up and save money for any consequences. No, I don't want to perish by the sword or by the dagger, but a martyr may indulge a little pardonable swanger, and a word or two of compliment my vanity would flatter. But I've got to die tomorrow, so it really doesn't matter.
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 So it really doesn't matter. If I were not a little mad and generally silly, I should give you my advice upon this topic willy-nilly. I should show you in a moment how to grapple with the question, and you'd rarely be astonished at the force of my suggestion. On the subject, I should write you almost value of a letter full of excellent suggestions when I feel a little better. But at present, I'm afraid I am as mad as any hatter, so I'll keep him to myself, for my opinion doesn't matter.
Her opinion doesn't matter.
Her opinion doesn't matter.
Her opinion doesn't matter.
Her opinion doesn't matter.
My opinion doesn't matter.
Her opinion doesn't matter.
My opinion doesn't matter.
If I'd been so lucky as to have a steady brother who could talk to me as we're talking now to one another, who could give me good advice when it's discovered I was earning but such just many favor, but in you I'm good fun. My existence would have made a rather interesting and alone of mine to live and die very decent and a whittle. So particularly rapid and intelligible Patterson generally heard it. If it is, it doesn't matter.
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 This particularly rapid and intelligible patter isn't generally heard, and if it is, it doesn't matter. This particularly rapid and intelligible patter isn't generally heard, and if it is, it doesn't matter.
This is Commander Whitehead having the great pleasure of interviewing Mr. Martyn Green.
And this is Bob Sherman, having the great pleasure of hearing again with you these wonderful conversations in music, originally aired on WQXR in July of 1962. We will continue after a brief intermission visit with Martin Liebman, Vice President and Department Manager for the Marine Midland branches in Martyn Green.
From your autobiography, Rupert D'Oyly Carte seems to have been rather a difficult man to know. His family name is indissolubly linked with Gilbert and Sullivan. How did this association begin between D'Oyly Carte and Gilbert and Sullivan?
Well, in the first place, Rupert D'Oyly Carte, if I may just go back to the beginning of your question, he wasn't a difficult man. And he was only difficult to know by virtue of the fact that he was an extremely shy man, strangely enough for a man in his position. Once you got to know him, he was very easy to get along with, very easy indeed. But Rupert was the son of Richard D'Oyly Carte, and he was the man who first brought Gilbert and Sullivan together in their series. Actually, Gilbert and Sullivan had met before under the banner of a man called Hollingshead at the Gaiety Theatre. That was when they wrote Thespis, or The Gods Grown Old, of which no music is left except one chorus, which is the opening chorus of Thespis, and it was transplanted bodily into Pirates of Penzance and given to the girls. But some years later, a manager by the name of Richard D'Oyly Carte, who was then manager of the Opera Comique, was presenting Pericole, which is rather interesting, and he wanted a curtain raiser, a four-piece, I think as they called it, and approached Gilbert. Now, Gilbert had written a one-page burlesque of the court trial for fun. I don't mean he'd written it just for the fun of the thing. There was a paper, the forerunner of Punch, by the way, called Fun. And he wrote this, as I say, just for this paper. And some years later, Carl Rosa had wanted a piece for his wife. Gilbert got this out, showed it to him. Carl Rosa liked it, but before he could produce it or set it to music, his wife died, and he returned the libretto to Gilbert. And then, as I say, Richard D'Oyly Carte wanted this curtain raiser for Pericole, and he approached Gilbert, and out came Trial by Jury again. And he said, fine, I know just the composer, I think. Go along and see Arthur Sullivan. Read it to him. But Gilbert, by this time, was so bored with Trial by Jury himself, he began to think, when he'd finished reading it, that it was no good, only to turn round and find Sullivan in hysterics, loving every word of it. And 2 weeks later, he'd composed it. It went into rehearsal, and I think they said at one time that Trial by Jury was written, composed, rehearsed, and presented in 2 weeks. That's not quite true, because it was written many years before the libretto. Mm-hmm. But I think it is one of the most delightful short pieces. Incidentally, it is not called an opera or an operetta. It is a dramatic cantata. Why dramatic, I don't know, because it's just one barrel of fun from beginning to end. And to give you an example of that, if you would care to hear it, I think the judge's song is one of the most amusing in the whole of the series.
Let's listen to it before we go on, shall we?
Okay.
For these kind words accept my thanks, I pray. A breach of promise we will try today. But firstly, if the time you'll not begrudge, I'll tell you how I came to be a judge. You tell us how. I'll tell you how. You tell us how. I'll tell you how. You tell us how. To be our judge. Let me speak. Let him speak. Let me speak. Let him speak. Let me speak. Yes, let him speak. Let me speak. Let me speak. When I good Thank you. When I, good friends, was called to the bar, I'd an appetite fresh and hearty, for I was, as many young barristers are, an impecunious party. I'd a swallowtail coat of a beautiful blue, a brief which I bought of a booby, a couple of shirts and a collar or two, and a ring that looked like a ruby. A couple of shirts and a collar or two, and a ring that looked like a ruby. In Westminster Hall I danced a dance like a semi-despondent fury. for I thought I never should hit on a chance of addressing a British jury. I soon got tired of third-class journeys and dinners of bread and water. So I fell in love with the rich attorney's elderly, ugly daughter.
So you fell in love with the rich attorney's elderly, ugly daughter.
The rich attorney, he jumped with joy and replied to my fond professions.
You shall reap the reward of your pluck, my boy, at the Bailey in Middlesex sessions. You'll soon get used to her looks, said he, and a very nice girl you'll find her. She may very well pass for 43 in the dust with a light behind her.
She may very well pass for 43 in the dust with a light behind her.
The rich attorney was as good as his word, and the briefs came trooping gaily. And every day my voice was heard at the sessions or ancient bailey. All thieves who could my fees afford relied on my orations. And many a burglar I've restored to his friends and his relations.
And many a burglar is restored to his friends and his relations.
At length I became as rich as the Gurneys, an incubus then I thought her. So I threw over that rich attorney's elderly, ugly daughter. The rich attorney, my character high, tried vainly to disparage.
No.
Yes. And now, if you please, I'm ready to try this breach of promise of marriage.
And now, if you please, he's ready to try this breach of promise of marriage.
For now I'm a judge.
And a good judge, too.
Yes, now I'm a judge.
And a good judge, too.
Though all my law be fudge, yet I'll never, never budge, but I'll live and die a judge.
And a good judge, too.
It was managed by a job.
And a good job, too.
It was managed by a job.
And a good job, too.
Though it's patent to the mob that my being made a mob was effected by a job.
And a good job, too.
I'd like to pursue this association between D'Oyly Carte and Gilbert and Sullivan for a moment. You say that Rupert D'Oyly Carte was a shy man, which made him a little difficult to know. But it does seem to me, from everything that I've heard and read in your book, that the company was a little tradition-bound and formalized, almost inhibited. Is this an accurate impression?
Pretty well, they were inhibited to a very large extent. Now, I don't know to what extent Rupert D'Oyly Carte was responsible for this. Certainly the stage director was a martinet and would have nothing but Gilbert's business and would stick to Gilbert's prompt book to the letter. And if I put in anything different, of course, Gordon came down on me like a ton of hot bricks. Of course, eventually, Gordon was retired, and then one or two other things began to happen. For instance, on one occasion, I wanted to, for no other reason, and no good reason, I wanted to, what we say in England, dry up the contralto. It was in the Mikado.
This is a piece of fun, I suppose, just to...
This was sheer fun,
yes.
But I didn't know how I was going to do it. And all the way through the show, I was trying to think, what can I do? I've got to dry this woman up somehow. I got the devil inside me. And came the point where Coco goes on to Katisha, and then comes the point, for years I have loved you with a white-hot passion which is slowly but surely consuming my very vitals. With this she rounded on me and used to chase me around the stage. On this particular occasion, the brain again leapt, and as the brain leapt, I leapt, and I climbed one of the flats right to the top. Well, that was the end of the contralto. She just shook on that stage. Of course, that was helpful to the audience because they realized that she dried up, which was something entirely new, and they shook.
Yes.
To such an extent that I was really wondering how I was going to get down again if I didn't fall, because I was only hanging on by my toes and my hands to a piece of flat.
Defying gravity.
More or less. And eventually they quietened down, and I thought, well, the only thing to do was to speak my next line from that position. And my next line was, "Ah, shrink not from me," which, of course, was just to carry on.
Yes.
Fortunately, during that laugh, I was able to get down. Well, that created chaos among the management. The manager came around, the stage manager. I was really on the carpet. And the next thing I knew was that the general manager of the company had been dispatched hurriedly to New York from London to find out what this was all about. And he arrived before the end of that week, I think. He had to see, and we were playing it for a whole week, he had to see this performance and see what was happening. Well, apparently Richard Collett collapsed when he saw it. Wired or cabled Rupert Carte, and Rupert wired back, "Keep it in, I will see it in London." He came to see it, and I'm told that he slid under his seat. And the result was that he had a special ladder built behind the scenery, flat, so that there'd been no chance of me damaging the scenery or myself.
You ran up the scenery all the time, from then onwards. Really.
And on top of which, I only the other day I came across a letter from, I was going through some files, and I came across a letter from Rupert D'Oyly Carte in his own handwriting, in which he was saying that he was very pleased with the new business I put in, and he would leave it to me to think up any new business for anything else. And when I did, I was to let him know, he would consider it, and if it was good, it was kept in. He was not a Martyn.
On a tree by a river, a little tomtit sang, "Willow, tit, willow, tit, willow." And I said to him, "Dicky bird, why do you sit singing willow, tit, willow, tit, willow? Is it weakness of intellect, birdie," I cried, "or a rather tough worm in your little inside?" With a shake of his poor little head, he replied, "Oh, willow, tit, willow, tit, willow." He slapped at his chest as he sat on that bough, singing willow, tit, willow, tit, willow. And a cold perspiration bespangled his brow. Oh, willow, tit, willow, tit, willow. He sobbed and he sighed, and a gurgle he gave. Then he plunged himself into the billowy wave, and an echo arose from the suicide's grave. Oh, willow, tit, willow, tit, willow. Now I feel just as sure as I'm sure that my name isn't Willow, tit, willow, tit, willow. 'Twas blighted affection that made him exclaim, "Oh, willow, tit, willow, tit, willow." And if you remain callous and obdurate, I shall perish as he did, and you will know why. Though I probably shall not exclaim as I die, "Oh, willow, tit, willow, tit, willow."
Now, Mr. Green, Tit Willow, also one of my favorites, you said was one of yours, and you had a little story to tell us about it.
It's rather funny, as a matter of fact. When I was at college, we were allowed to take a few concerts, Masonic dinners and things like that. to help swell our pocket money. And one of the songs that I used to sing a great deal at these Masonic concerts was a little song called Titwillow. I didn't know then that it was anything to do with Gilbert and Sullivan. I was not au fait with Gilbert and Sullivan myself. And I used to sing it then much the same as you heard it just now. But when I took over the roles from Sir Henry Lytton, Titwillow was sung as a comic number, as a comedy song. All sorts of comedy business was put in, queer little vocal effects. He would go into a falsetto voice when he sang an echo arose from the suicide's grave. Ooh, Titwillow, Titwillow. Anything to raise a laugh. He played a bass fiddle across the back of Katisha, slapped her on the back. And we were doing it one week in Washington, D.C., during one of our American tours. And I think it was on the Friday or the Saturday night as we left for Chicago on the Sunday. There was a letter waiting for me in the theater in Chicago from a woman in Washington who had seen that one of the performances, and it was really ticking me off good and proper for ruining a beautiful song, taking it to comic extremes. The comedy, she pointed out, lay in the situation, not in the song. It was really a pathetic little song. And I must admit that my mind went back to the days when I used to sing it at the Masonic dinners, and I quite agreed with her. So I went to Isidore Godfrey, our musical director, and I said, look, I'm going to sing Titwillow tonight straight.
In Chicago?
In Chicago. We're opening with the Mikado tonight, and I'm going to sing Titwillow straight. Absolutely straight and very quiet. And I'm wondering if you would mute the strings. Well, said, I can't do that. Well, I said, look, I'm going to take it so quiet that if we have unmuted strings, you won't hear me. Well, after a lot of persuasion, he gave way. That was, of course, practically throwing tradition out of the windows. And came the performance. I'd warned the Katisha, and I sang Titwillow absolutely straight, as I say, as you heard it just now. I took 2 encores, and the following morning there was a double header, headline, right across 2 pages. Martyn Green sings new hit song, Titwillow.
Splendid.
And it has remained that way ever since. Every Coco that's played it has always sung it that way. And when I got back to England on that occasion, Rupert D'Oyly Carte gave me one of the most delightful pats on the back I've ever had in my life. He said, you know, I've often wondered about that myself. I've only got one thing to say about it now. Don't sing it too slowly.
I think we ought to have something else in the Mikado. There's so much to talk about on the subject of that.
Well, it is probably the most popular of the operas. You know, I would very much like to hear a number that I don't sing, but I think it's quite a favorite with a lot of people, and that is Yum Yum's song in the second act. The sun whose rays are all ablaze with ever-living glory.
It's a marvelous one. Let's have that.
The sun whose rays are all ablaze with ever-living glory does not deny his majesty, he scorns to tell a story. He don't exclaim, my blush was she so kindly indulgent, but fierce and bold in fiery bold, he glories all effulgent. I mean to rule the earth as he the sky. We really know
Right back at the beginning of your career, Mr. Green, learning to sing at the Royal College of Music, I noted that you weren't allowed to sing songs for 2 or 3 years, and that diction and elocution were regarded as being vital, especially by Gustav Garcia, your great teacher. He was 80 years old.
He was about 81, I think, when he began to give me voice lessons. Oh, yes, he was a martinet. You went to him, you thought you were going to start singing songs. No, you wouldn't get a song to sing for at least 12 months.
It was all exercises.
Just exercises, all based, of course, on his father, Manuel Garcia's book of exercises. And incidentally, if I may just cut in here, I don't know whether you're aware of the fact, but Manuel Garcia was responsible for the fact that all you, the present-day throat surgeons, can now see your larynx. He invented the laryngoscope.
Great Scott.
And it's still in use, and I don't think it will ever go out. He didn't do it for medical reasons. He did it simply because he himself wanted to know how the vocal cords worked. But after about 12 months, Gustav, my voice teacher, would let you begin to sing a song. And he was also a martinet for diction. He once said to me, "What is the use of telling a story if nobody knows what it's about?"
Now, that statement intrigued me when I read it in your book, and I concur wholeheartedly. And I wonder whether this doesn't put opera, grand opera, at a considerable disadvantage in that the non-cognoscenti are unable to hear, if it's in Italian or German and they don't speak that language, what is going on. And they're left entirely with their visual and oral impressions shorn of understanding. Don't you think that this is a pity?
I think it's a pity, personally. Of course, the real lover of grand opera will say that the words don't really matter, it is the music. I am inclined to side a little with Gilbert here, who insisted that the words were equally of as much value as the music, because they are telling a story. The music can help it along, but as it does in Gilbert and Sullivan, it helps it along. But without a knowledge of what's going on, of what the words mean, I'm positive that the enjoyment, the full enjoyment of the non-linguists must suffer. And yet, even if it's not in a foreign language, and you yourself are listening to somebody who is supposed to be singing the languages you know and speak, you still can't hear some of their words. They permit the vocal tone to override the diction. And I think that's such a pity.
And what a pity that our anniversary album time is up. You've been listening to Martyn Green in conversation with Commander Edward Whitehead, a GNS special dating back to July of 1962. There is, however,